In 1991, some of the world's most elite cave divers gathered at Indian Springs Cave in Florida for an expedition to explore uncharted territory. But as they made their way out, an extremely rare and terrifying event occurred in the cave, placing two divers in the most horrifying situation imaginable. This event was so rare that it led to the only recorded cave diving fatality caused by natural factors rather than human error. In the end, only one diver made it out, and not without extreme psychological trauma. These are the final moments of the Indian Springs Cave tragedy. Nestled in the Wakulla County, the Indian Springs Cave is a massive system that plunges a staggering 300 feet deep and stretches over 2 miles long. In November 1991, under the banner of the Woodville Karst Plains Project, a highly anticipated exploration dive was set in motion. The team poised to undertake this venture consisted of some of the most accomplished cave divers in the world. This dive was to kick off a series planned for nearly 2 years, meticulously orchestrated to probe unexplored leads in the cave, complete with specially crafted decompression protocols tailored for the depths they were set to explore. Among the divers was George Irvine, marking his 77th cave dive amidst a career spanning nearly 1,000 technical dives. The operation was meticulously planned, with 3 teams designated to dive the cave. The first team's mission was to deploy a set of gas bottles deep within the cave. Following them, George, alongside another diver, would position a second cache of bottles to aid the traverse. The final push into the unknown would be led by Parker Turner and Bill Gavin, the very explorers who initially uncovered these tantalizing leads. Meanwhile, any remaining crew members would remain topside, ready to provide support. On the crisp morning of November 17th, the teams convened at Indian Springs, a serene pond nestled within a clearing, bordered by dense trees and a quaint boardwalk. It was here that the dive teams began their descent. Team 1 submerged first, followed shortly by Team 2. They traced their path through the pond to the cave's shadowy entrance. Soon after, Parker and Bill plunged into the waters for the most daunting dive of the 3 teams. As the first 2 teams executed their roles and began their ascent, Parker and Bill started their dive, navigating through the labyrinthian cave. The journey to the newly discovered leads was a meticulous 40-minute traverse, followed by a 25-minute exploration at the staggering depth of 300 feet, and another 40-minute journey back to the cave entrance. The path starts at the serene pond floor and leads into a cavern that stretches into the heart of Indian Springs Cave. This cavern gave way to a tunnel that extended for hundreds of feet, culminating at Score's Restriction, a narrow passageway that allows only one diver to pass through at a time. Beyond this point, the cave expands into a network of winding tunnels lined with rough-hewn limestone, guided by permanent lines fixed along the route, vital in the murky waters. Bill and Parker reached the expansive Wakulla Room. After completing their exploration, they began their return at the 63-minute mark. But what they didn't know was that they were about to experience a chilling anomaly, a horrific 1-in-a-million event. Approximately 1,500 feet from the entrance, they reached a distinctive arrow marker. Bill noted they were perfectly on schedule. However, as they made a left turn at the marker, the visibility suddenly worsened. Initially dismissing it as stirred-up silt, they pressed on, only to find the water thickening into an impenetrable cloud of silt. The floor vanished beneath a swirling mass, though the guiding line on the ceiling remained visible. As they advanced, the visibility deteriorated further, forcing them to abandon their scooter and cling to the guiding line. When they reached the point where Score's Restriction should have been, the line mysteriously vanished into the sandy floor. A wall of sand stood where Score's Restriction should have been, and despite their efforts to dig out the line, it was no use. At this point, visibility was reduced to less than a foot, as they faced the bewildering blockade. They quickly dropped their stage bottles and scooters, retracing their steps to check the alternate fixed line, only to find it too was swallowed by the sand. The passage they had navigated just moments ago had vanished. Unknown to the divers, a dramatic shift had occurred shortly after George and his partner passed through the restriction. The ceiling, disturbed by the ascent of decompression bubbles, had caused sediment-laden limestone rocks to fall, unleashing a torrential underwater sandstorm that sealed Score's restriction. As Bill and Parker searched for an escape, the scenario grew increasingly dire. Bill knew he had to take action quickly. He attached his reel to the main line and went off, hoping to uncover a new exit. However, in his mind, he knew the chances were slim. He followed a faint current, but doubt clouded his judgment, making him question their location. Did they make a mistake? Did they take a wrong turn? Bill thought to himself. Rejoining Parker, the two divers spent the next agonizing 45 minutes scouring for a passage, their air supplies dwindling rapidly. Realizing their gas was alarmingly low, Parker wrote on his slate, "What do we do?" Bill, trying to stay composed, made one last attempt to look for another path. So, once again, he retraced his steps, desperately searching, though with little luck. Upon returning, Parker was nowhere to be seen. Perhaps it was wishful thinking in such a dire situation, but he thought just maybe Parker found a way out. Alone, Bill resorted to his stage bottle, his thoughts racing for a solution. For a few minutes, Bill waited for Parker, but quickly realized that if Parker wasn't back soon, he would drown. But just as his stage bottle ran dry, Bill stumbled upon a line attached to the main line. Bill had no idea how it got there, but he had no choice but to follow it anyway. The line led to a slight opening in the restriction. Attached was a stage regulator. It must have been Parker's. Extreme panic was setting in, and Bill had no time to process what he was seeing. He freed himself of his regulator and pushed himself through the opening. Frantically, he followed the line upward, navigating through the narrowing path until he reached a new set of bottles, all on a single breath hold. Reaching the bottles in a desperate gasp, he finally had time to process what had happened. The grim reality set in. Parker should have drowned by now. Bill realized Parker's body was likely hidden in the swirling silt. Alone and overwhelmed, he awaited the arrival of the support divers, the silence of the deep punctuating the tragic end of their dive. As the support team surfaced, a sense of unease hovered in the air. George, sensing something might have gone wrong, decided to dive back down to investigate. Descending to about 110 feet, he carefully looked around the area. From his vantage point, everything appeared in order, with the gas bottles intact. However, the collapsed Score's restriction wasn't visible in his line of sight, its condition obscured by the dense silt that clouded the water. Upon surfacing, George noticed his partner's visible distress, a palpable sense of dread hanging over him. When questioned, George confirmed he hadn't seen Bill and Parker, but reassured them based on the untouched state of the bottles. At this point, another support diver emerged and asked if he'd had visual contact with the two divers. George confirmed that he saw Bill, and his partner confirmed that he had seen Parker, and that Parker had even waved at him. The support diver then said, "That wasn't Parker, that was me waving at you." This confusion raised alarms, prompting George's partner to plunge back into the murky depths. Moments later, he resurfaced with grim news. He had located Parker's tanks, abandoned on the line, with no sign of Parker or Bill. George and his partner re-entered the water, visibility near zero, tethering themselves to the line as they commenced a frantic search through the silt-filled waters. The urgency was palpable, each minute critical as they navigated the obscured cave. During the search, George collided with a figure in the murk. It was Bill, motionless and silent. George noticed that Bill was breathing, but still eerily silent. He handed Bill a pressure gauge to check his air supply. It was then that Bill passed George a slate with a chilling message: "Parker is dead." George felt a cold shiver as he read the words. It took him a moment to grasp the full impact, and he realized Bill was probably in shock at this point. George knew he had to make sure Bill had enough air to last through the necessary decompression stops. As they sat in the murky water, George filled Bill in with everything he knew so far, though details about the extent of the cave collapse were still unclear. Meanwhile, George reattached himself to the main line and began a frantic search through the silt for Parker's body. After 9 exhaustive sweeps, he ran out of air without finding any trace of Parker. Overwhelmed and exhausted, George surfaced too quickly, forgetting to decompress properly, and suffered minor decompression sickness. By the time George emerged, the scene above was chaotic. Police and a crowd of people, including familiar cave divers, had gathered. Some speculated that Parker might have found an air pocket, but George, heartbreakingly, confirmed that the depth where he ran out of air made survival impossible. The team informed the police they were out of gas and couldn't continue the search that day. They planned to return the next day with fresh supplies, holding on to a slim hope they could find Parker. By 6 a.m. the next morning, the police had already retrieved the body. Ironically, Parker was the instructor that trained the local police on diving techniques and body recovery operations. The officers, who had become his friends over the years, were determined not to leave him in the water any longer than necessary. After an investigation, the divers pieced together what likely happened during the tragic dive. When Bill first noticed the flow of water, Parker had also detected it. But unlike Bill, Parker actually found the source, a small hole in the restriction. Desperate and nearly out of air, Parker made a critical decision. He removed his tanks to squeeze through the narrow opening, securing his safety spool to the main line as he dragged his tanks behind him. However, once through the hole, Parker ran out of air and passed out just 30 feet away from the safety of the decompression tanks. His tanks, dropped in his final moments, landed on the line below, while his wetsuit's buoyancy lifted him towards the ceiling. His actions inadvertently cleared more of the restriction, allowing Bill to follow through the opening with his tanks minutes later. Parker's tanks, having landed precisely on the line, inadvertently guided Bill up and out, directly to the decompression tanks. This fortunate positioning likely saved Bill's life. In fact, a delay of even a minute could have resulted in Bill's tragic demise. Remarkably, as documented in a 2015 study, Parker's death remains the only known cave diving fatality attributed to natural causes rather than human error. More than 30 years later, this tragic incident remains unique in the annals of cave diving history.